Welcome to the Show Up Way Show. So happy to have you here this evening. It's a little bit past 7 on the East Coast, which means, yes, you got to look at my mug. That's kind of the rules, and I'm happy about it. I make the rules and enforce them, and I'm not good at doing either. But that's okay. I'm still going to do it anyway. So it's 7 p.m. You've got to look at me, and I'm happy that you are. You know it's going to be a good show because they're all good. So since you know they're all good, do the right thing. Click that like button right now. If you're not clicking it now, you are literally saying how much you hate me. And I know you don't hate me, otherwise you wouldn't be watching. So prove to everybody in the world that you actually don't hate me and click that like button because it does matter. I have what I think is an amazing guest today. I have with me someone who is out there doing the dirty deeds that some of us wish we could be doing and giving us info that we need that some people just will not provide. He is self-identified as a prime source documentarian. He has worked with Oscar-winning, Emmy-winning films, and he is working. He's the co-founder, I think, or editor. He'll tell me, one of the two, of News to Share. The man himself, Ford Fischer. How are you, sir?
Hi, doing quite well.
Good. What was your title again?
Yeah, so editor-in-chief, and I was the co-founder. I founded it with somebody else.
I was right. I thought that was true. Okay. I went on memory, and my memory was correct. I'm not that old yet. One of these days I will be. But I'm very happy to follow what he's doing here. Please do me a small favor, guys, if you would. Head on over to Ford, at Ford Fischer. That's Fischer, if you are just listening to this over on Twitter. Ford, like the car, Ford Fischer. Follow him on Twitter or head over to news2share.com to get all of the goodies that you're doing. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on today, Ford, is you brought up something that I watched. I watched the recent coverage of you in Texas. You are doing things that mainstream media just doesn't really do, right? I mean, they'll cover something, but it's from like 9 miles away, right, in a tent, and they'll go, I'm here 17 miles away from the protesters, and let me tell you what's happening. You're like with them. Like you cover some detailed stuff. Why? I mean, I know clearly you're insane, but besides that, I mean, why?
Right. So what I do, I've kind of styled as primary source documentary. And what I mean by that is that what I am presenting to the audience is not a concoction made out of the images that that are produced, but rather just giving the audience directly the images. And so using yesterday as kind of a case study or an example, yesterday there was a event called a Drag Queen Christmas in San Antonio, and a group of right-wing activists showed up armed to protest it on the basis that they disagreed with people being able to attend it of all ages.
And this is it right here. Let me show it real fast.
Okay.
What do we do?
That's it right there. And this, by the way, is on the News to Share YouTube page. So if you want to go see it, you can see it yourself right here. This is what he was doing yesterday.
And so the thing that you can kind of see is that there's no explanation or opining from me really in my coverage. So I go out to events like this where, so in that case, it was armed right-wingers showing up to protest the drag event, and then armed left-wingers showing up to counter-protest those people and sort of protect the event. And so you have two armed rival factions, and I think that most people would find that fairly interesting, that that sort of situation happens in these United States of America. But there is fairly limited mainstream media that cares about this sort of situation. And even to the extent that media shows up to it, it tends to be very siphoned down in terms of the information that ultimately makes it out to you, right? You end up seeing It was in the airport leaving this morning. I saw a news package, like a local news package about it, and it was probably 2 minutes long. And that doesn't mean that the mainstream media is necessarily lying per se about what happened, but
Right.
it gives you a far more limited experience of what a situation looked like.
100%.
And so for me, my kind of formula is, when possible, I try to live stream events beginning to end. So last
I've
night it
noticed
was
that.
successful. It ended up being like a 4 hour long live stream. So
Yep.
somebody, if they really wanted to, could watch the entire event beginning to end uncut. And then what I tend to do is put out a highlight reel sort of showing what I consider to be highlights from the event.
Yep.
Last night that was 20 minutes, but those range from kind of 5 to 20 minutes, depending on
That's the
what
one that I
exactly
was
happened.
showing, by the way, right? The one that
Right.
the audience just saw, that was the clip, but you can go to the lives on his YouTube page if you want to. And it's literally News to Share YouTube page. In fact, the links are there. If you want to check the links, they are in the description. You can check that out. And I saw there's a 4-hour one. That's on the live.
And so the philosophy of that for me is that I try not to have it be driven by my own personal views of a subject. So, of course, as someone who lives in this political world and hears arguments from activists on a daily basis, I have my own views on
Of
subjects.
course.
But when I go out to cover them, it is not my intention to try to guide the viewer in one direction or another, but rather to have them start from a place of truth. That if you have truth first, then you can have a reasonable discussion or understanding of what went on.
So let me ask you a tough question, a serious tough question here.
Yep.
You're human, like all the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And, one group is going to kind of pull at your heartstrings more than the other, perhaps, in a certain given case. How are you aware, or how do you know that even though you may not be saying group A is better than group B, that you aren't somehow filming that? How do you know that you aren't somehow filming group A better than group
Right.
B, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an inherently challenging problem. I think that
Sure.
the way that comes out more in media is actually through editing.
Okay.
So for me, when I'm filming an event beginning to end, my audience is able to see the manner in which I interact with people beginning to end.
Got
And
it.
so I do try to spend, when possible, a relatively equal amount of time on either side of the thing. I try to spend an equal amount of time hearing what this side is saying, what this side is saying. If I have opportunities to interview one side or the other side, trying to show them in about equal amounts of time when possible. But I think that the thing that mainstream media can do that leads someone in one direction or another, even without opining, would be to take the more favorable clip. The thing when
Right.
someone articulates themselves better,
Right.
from one side, and then when somebody says something that sounds tripped up or wrong on the other side, taking that moment out of context or
Got
something
it.
like that.
Got it.
For me, the live stream creates a sense of accountability to the audience, so that if I was to interview people on all sides and then make one of the sides look like a bunch of dorks by only
Right.
using the parts where they say something that's
Mhm.
clearly a mistake or wrong, and then only use the parts where the other side sounds very articulate or something, that could be very easily called out by someone looking at the
Got
live
it.
stream and saying, there was
So
no
you
mission
basically
here of
make
some kind.
yourself accountable by having the receipts out front.
Yeah, and to give an example, like, there are moments when there's something that I don't even realize that I've captured, and my audience can point it out. So I had a situation once in Portland where I covered a battle between the left and right wingers, and there was a assault on a journalist by several of the people from the left wing side. And that happened in a very open way, like sort of in front of me. And it was a moment that I emphasized in my follow-up reporting. Here's the HD video of exactly what happened when that attack occurred. And someone actually pointed out, in your live stream, there's a moment where you can see that a right winger actually ran past that same journalist and sprayed them with something. And I didn't notice that when
Oh,
it first happened. But because somebody pointed that out, I followed it up on the thread and say, unfortunately, this journalist was actually assaulted by both sides. And so having that live stream available does create that level of accountability for
got it.
myself as well. I think it's fairly rare, to be honest, that my audience ever actually says this was taken out of context. I don't have a time constraint the way that mainstream media might be like, we're
Sure.
cutting something down to 2 minutes, and that makes them make hard choices where they're cutting people's thoughts apart.
Let me go to that, right? And I think
Yeah.
I think this has changed I think the American psyche or the American mindset has changed. I think there was a time, maybe if you're older, right? I'm in my 50s, maybe my age or older, 60s, 70s. I think many of us were accustomed to the 2-minute soundbite, right? Or the thing, or just yell the thing at me and I'm done, right? But I think a younger generation is much more open to long form that the older generation has. Many of us haven't gotten there yet. I personally like it, right? I'm just trying to prove to you all how young I am. So I like it, but no. Seriously though, a lot of people who are older, they don't have the patience. They're like, no, talking head that I've trusted for 40 years, please tell me what to think. Right? Whatever my talking head is my talking head, Rachel Maddow, is my talking head Sean Hannity, whoever is my talking head, please tell me what to think in like 7 minutes and I'm good. But I think younger generation, no, I think they really are more open to having a longer form discussion, a conversation. A perfect example, that's Joe Rogan, right? I mean, that's the perfect example of that. A guy who no one thought you could do a 2-hour podcast. What are you, nuts? And it's the most popular podcast in the world. Well, at least in America, I don't know if the world, but at least in America, for sure. So I get your point and I agree. I want to go one step further though. When you're doing places like, I don't know, you're out at in the Middle East or something, are you doing exactly the same thing? Does it change when you're not, protesting in the city? Right? You literally have, and some of you may not know, Ford does everything from Proud Boys to Antifa to Hamas to Black Panthers. It doesn't matter. He's got all of them. Does it change for you?
Yeah, so I do hire other videographers, and so all of those I have filmed personally, except for I have a contributor in the Gaza Strip who sends me raw video from. So when I have a freelancer shoot for me, I don't generally have those people live stream for me, basically due to technical limitations. So in the case of like me being sent footage of Hamas, right? Like I try to put it out in as complete a way as I essentially receive it. So I'm doing very minimal editing, but at the same time, they are sending me what they can, and then I'm receiving that and publishing it as best as I can. So that's a little bit of an edge case, but in the other situations, I think that really the difference is sometimes the availability of cell phone network, frankly. Urban environments tend to have better cell phone networks. There tends to be higher speeds in areas with bigger populations. And I have been to a lot of rural settings where there are protests where that's simply not accessible. I've also found actually that usually the lower population an area is, the less likely it is that mainstream media has shown up to that thing in the first place.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Even when there is mainstream media at something, I find myself sort of filling a gap of there isn't as complete of coverage, there isn't as contextual of coverage for something. There are a million journalists, but then my style is different. But in some situations where it's like a rural where it's somewhere just far away from a newsroom, from a national newsroom, a lot of news outlets just don't bother. And so you brought up like the example of Black Panther demonstrations. I've been to several Black self-defense group events, Black Panther events in the past year, and sometimes I found myself the only journalist at those.
Yes.
The media just completely skips it, and I think that's in part because they don't bother to do the research, sometimes because of the inconvenience of actually going to the places that they're taking place, but also I think because the mainstream media is so married to the binary of politics, the idea that there's like team red and team blue, and you're either on team blue, which means that you like taxes and you don't like guns, you like gay people and weed, but but not medical freedom or something, right? Or you're on team red, you don't like taxes, you do like guns.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Right. So it's like these very simple binaries. But when I've gone out to cover events, people who go out on the street to talk about issues tend to think about those issues very deeply, and they tend to be a lot more complex than that. So, I mean, case in point, last night, I filmed people who were carrying firearms to defend the LGBT community, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know that CNN knows what to do with that.
They don't. I think you made two valid points I want to bring up. The first one I bring up is the idea that there's no local news, right? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's hardly any local news. So if it isn't mainstream left-right news, it doesn't fit into a box. If I can't tell a left or right story, I think the actual reporters are afraid, right? If that reporter goes to that LGBTQ people carrying guns, if they don't spin it right, either way they're in trouble, right? Their editor is mad at them no matter what. How do you make your editor happy? You really can't, right? Now, local news used to be, and I think in as small as it is, in that if you are a local newspaper, you can just report the news, right? The person who reads a local newspaper that has a 2,000 or 500 person distribution, they want to know the news. And what I found when I was campaigning, when I ran for governor, particularly last time in 2018, is I would go to these small places like you're talking about. No mainstream news would show up, but all the local news would, because no one goes to nothing happens. So local news would show up. But what I also found is, and this is, I think, kind of your model in a way, many local newspapers, one writer writes for 6 or 7 papers. So they'll write an article and either just give it to multiple newspapers, or change a couple words, or change their pen name, and just it'll go out to multiple places. I feel that's kind of similar to what you do, in that what you do, any media outlet can get that from you. Is that right?
Yeah. So the sort of difference is, and this kind of goes into my definition of primary source documentary, is that I think of myself as a primary source. So there is only one. I mean, I have it on Facebook and YouTube, and then on Twitter, it's like in a thread instead of just one video. It's kind of like split up into chunks. But basically, it's one output, right? Live stream and a compilation of raw footage. And that is the sort of primary source from which any other outlet can license. And for the most part, with some rare exceptions, when those outlets are licensing them, it is usually to create a secondary source type of document. And what I mean by that is, like CNN licensing my footage of January 6th. When you turn on CNN, you're not just watching a 20-minute compilation of this is what January 6th looked like. The way that they use my footage is they are, talking about, today, the one oath keeper was convicted of this charge and acquitted of the other charge. And then they show an image of that oath keeper as filmed by me. Right. So they are putting it into a new sort of thing, a new application of that story. It is common that a outlet will be covering a story and they missed a particular shot, that there was some important sort of moments that I captured, and then they want to use that moment. And so them licensing from me sort of fills in a hole or a gap to tell a story that they weren't capable of doing. But critically, that original thing still exists. And so something that I tend to do when possible is, if I have seen my work be used on mainstream media, I try to post about that and then also reference the original work, so that if somebody is seeing the two things, they're able to kind of do a comparative analysis. So for me, watching mainstream media, which I don't like to do, when I on the occasion that I am watching like a cable news program, like the problem that I tend to have with it is that I am unable to just readily access that context. That if they show me, a couple seconds of a Trump speech, that I don't know what the whole totality of the Trump speech was. And I might not be interested to watch 2 hours of it, but it would be nice if it was handy, right?
Absolutely.
In the case of my own work, when my work is used online, I have the confidence that outlet's viewers, if they really want to, can go and visit my work to see, the original
but
context.
that goes to the next piece, right? We talked about accountability. There's a second piece I want to bring, which is credibility. And in today's world, it used to be, when I was growing up, right? I grew up in the 70s. I mean, the news was the law in someone's head. Like if Dan Rather told you something, well, it's true because Dan Rather said it, right? I mean, it's true. This is true. I saw it on 60 Minutes. Duh, it's true, right? I mean, that's what everybody believed, everybody thought. The old Walter Cronkite days, right? That was what it was. Those days are gone. And a lot of people find less credibility in mainstream media than they do in independent media. Now, you've told me that you do work with Matt Taibbi sometimes. And I want to bring this up as an important point, right? The Twitter stuff that's coming out now, it's a big deal. If this was 40 years ago, if Twitter existed 40 years ago, if this was 40 years ago, there's no doubt that ABC or NBC or CNN has it goes to them. This doesn't go to some independent journalist. That would have never happened, right? If there was one, and we had when I was Geraldo Rivera back in the 70s and 80s was kind of like an independent journalist a little bit, but he was always connected to some major company, right? So he was probably the closest thing we had to an independent.
He was just a little edgy. He was on cable, but he was just a little edgy.
Correct. That's the closest thing we had. That was the best thing we had then, right? But now it's almost like Taibbi is the trusted source, or in your case, News to Share is a trusted source, and then everything else is a spin on it. See, that's a spin on what Matt. That's a spin on News to Share. It's a massive change, but then what makes you credible versus me or some other guy going out and getting some stuff? And I feel like you've kind of answered my question, but maybe not.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
On my own work, I guess I would say I think the credibility comes from that the claims that I make are all backed by primary sources. So usually the primary source is my own footage. Sometimes the primary source is footage that I have purchased from another person, such a freelance videographer or whatever.
Sure.
And in some cases, I try to report by obtaining documents, such as FOIAing a body cam and then publishing that. But I basically don't make claims about things that aren't essentially backed up. And so I think that that's sort of the main difference. I have noticed a trend of people who sort of call themselves independent journalists, and the main thing that they are doing is basically reading other people's news and then opining on it, sort of a secondary or even like a tertiary source. And it doesn't mean that what they're doing is wrong. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. That serves a purpose, and that some people might be very fascinated to hear what a particular person who they trust and respect thinks of something. It's not a bad
100%.
thing, but that doesn't it doesn't lend itself to an understanding of fact. It lends itself to an understanding of what somebody thinks of what somebody else reported was fact.
Right.
In the case of Matt's work, like I would let it speak for itself for the most part. But the thing that I would say that I find compelling about it is the elements of it that are actually primary sources. So when I've read his thread, as well as Barry Wise, the other people who have been releasing sort of the Twitter files or the Twitter leaks or whatever people have been calling it, like the things that I found very compelling are the actual messages that they've screenshotted, right? The original. So I think probably the thing that I found most interesting in all of those releases so far was that the Congressman Ro Khanna, who is a progressive Democrat, apparently contacted Twitter when there was the suppression of the New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop. And his concern was that, what is the standard by which you're justifying suppressing a news story? And the fact that the public never found out about that until now. But I think it's very interesting that you have a member of Congress reaching out to a corporation to say, I'm concerned about censorship, a Democrat, no less.
Well, look, I'm in general not a huge Ro Khanna fan. However, I want to give him props. He took action. He could have done nothing. And most of the government did nothing, or the reverse, tried to suppress more. He actually was like, wait a minute, is this a thing? Should we not be doing this? I'll give him credit for it. I wish more had done something.
So I think that something that's been interesting is that I've seen mainstream media sources, journalists associated with Washington Post and so forth, and I don't want to call out any in particular, but kind of saying that they feel like the Twitter files are not important, or that it's a non-issue or a non-story. And I think that
it's a nothing burger,
or a nothing burger.
A nothing burger.
I think that to me, understanding the inner dynamics of how censorship happens within these corporations is important, because it has affected me, and wrongly so. And I don't just mean that in terms of like everybody who has ever penalized for anything thinks that it was wrongly done to them.
Right.
But in my case, I have been removed by Facebook or suspended a total of 3 times, and every time they reversed it, and actually sometimes sent me apologies about it. Twitter, following January 6th, they marked my entire profile as this images that might be sensitive. So basically the
Yep.
same way that pornography is allowed on Twitter, but it's hard to access by accident, right? They make it so that you can't search for a profile if it's marked that way, and every single tweet is marked like you have to change your settings to make it accessible.
Right.
They marked my entire account that way for 5 months, and search suggestion banned it, and
Yep.
and then in
I
May that
know the
just went
feeling.
away, right? So so seeing those Twitter files where we were able to see the actual tools that they have internally was somewhat validating, right? Because Twitter had previously denied
100%.
the existence of shadow banning, and then we see the literally they had like a button, search suggestion ban, mark
Yep.
profile is not safe for work. So, you know, I
I
think
got to
that
tell you, if I bring up a piece for myself here, I had the
right.
same issue. Prior to me being against the COVID lockdowns,
Mhm.
I would do a show like this just on Facebook alone. 5,000, 6,000 views. Done. Easy day. Now I should miss on like 6 to 8 to 9 to 10 different profiles to get the same amount of views.
Right.
I have to stream to like, I'm on Roku, I'm on Rumble, I'm on everything you can imagine, right? I stream this on everything just so I can see my amount, because right after that, all of a sudden I went from 5,000 on Facebook to 500, literally overnight.
Yeah.
That is how bad it went.
As much as I try not to opine on things, the one issue of kind of like transparency, press freedom, censorship, like that category of stuff is sort of the area that I am willing to advocate, and I guess the reason is because I see those as parts of the instrument of the job, right? If my job is an exercise of free speech, then I think I have to, you know, defend free speech or advocate
Right.
for it, or at least advocate that we understand the ways in which it's impeded. Um,
Sure.
so I think that there is value in us having that transparency. I did see that Elon Musk has said that in the future he wants penalties to all be visible to the person who they're placed onto, and that they should be appealable. And so I do think that that would certainly
Yes.
be a step in the right direction. That, you know, in the situation that I had post January 6th, my entire profile was marked a certain way, but I had no way to do anything about it. There was no way to
Yes.
appeal that. Twitter never
Yep.
officially informed me that it was happening. It was just obvious in front of me that it was happening.
Yes. And
Um,
that drives me absolutely crazy. I completely agree.
so there
So
there
let
has to
me
be a greater
go.
degree of transparency.
I'm also about YouTube. Now, why do I bring up YouTube? Because if you're watching this and it's not on YouTube, do me a favor, subscribe to my YouTube page. Subscribe to Sharp Way YouTube page. I know I have multiple YouTube pages. I know I do. Just tell them I have to stream on all these pages. But let's pump this one up if you don't mind. Subscribe to my YouTube page. It does matter. It's important to me. The more you subscribe, the better. So please go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube page, the Sharp Way YouTube page. If you're on Sharp Way YouTube page, click that button that says get the notifications. It does matter. The more we can grow on that page, the better. I'm trying to grow all my pages so that I can so that when they shadow ban me again, I'll still have some place to go to. So please,
My YouTube is news to share, by the way. If you if you
there
want
we
to throw
go.
me a
Yes,
sub as well,
please do that. Yes, it's news to share. Do that. It does matter, guys. Help me out to the best of your ability. I appreciate it. Let me grab a couple of comments if I could. I got a bunch of comments popping up here. Let me grab one. Dave says Walter Cronkite would be fired for telling the truth today. I think you're right. We have some people who are my age watching, obviously. Because Shelly says, I miss Walter Cronkite. Yes, absolutely. But James says, I disagree on the young liking long form. They're all watching 30-second clips on TikTok and 10 minutes or less videos. It's difficult to get any teenager to watch a 2-hour movie from my observation. It's a good point. What do you think about that?
Yeah, okay, so there is some truth to this. I will say that I think that my audience is not the 13 to 17-year-old range, which is probably the generation most like addicted to the TikTok and so forth. But there is generally a trend, I will say, toward shorter form content where like YouTube videos have, you know, basically can be as long as you want them to be. I think 10 hours is technically the max, but essentially as long as you want them to be. You know, Facebook has incentivized, it can also go long, but incentivizes probably shorter form content. Twitter has a maximum of 280 characters to 2 minutes, 20 seconds. Like TikTok, like all of the direction of things. I remember that there was a social media site that had like a 7-second upload. Like,
yes.
God, I don't even remember what that was called, but I hated that.
People loved it.
Right.
They loved it.
But there's a distinction here, which
Um,
is that the resource being longer doesn't mean that you have to watch the entire thing for it to be
oh,
valuable.
I see what you're saying.
And
Okay.
I would also add that live is different. So my live stream was 4 hours, and I don't think there were that many people who probably last night actually sat and watched for 4 hours. However, it feels very different to be watching a situation as it happened, kind of as close as you can be to being there without being in danger by actually going there. Um, and watching a recording of that same length later, right? So people will kind of ride a live stream, and that is very different, right? So would you go to a sporting event that's long? Would you go to a, would you watch a would you watch a soccer game that is longer? Probably. Would you watch a recording afterwards of a soccer game when you know the outcome? No, you'd probably want to watch the
Well,
highlights.
it's funny you say that, right? Because I'll tell you what I did,
Mhm.
right? I went through a couple of things on your. I went to YouTube page, which by the way is
Right.
news to share on YouTube. I went there and I watched the full 20-minute piece. Then I went to the live and I kind of bounced around.
Right.
That's what I did, right? I
Yeah, of
mean, that's
course.
what I did. So
Yeah.
I watched 20-minute.
How dare
I
you?
got
You
a
didn't
good
watch
feel.
all 4 hours of
I did not. I'm telling you the truth. I wish I had. I did not. Then I
You
bounced
should. I
around.
would never encourage anybody to do that.
Yes.
Like, there's something
So
wrong with somebody if they're sitting down and watching my live stream after the fact, and they're just and they don't
right.
even press the times 1.25 speed or something. Like, if they're just in real time watching 4 hours, no, you got to take a break. Got to do something else.
So yes, so I did. So maybe James is right. Maybe I'm wrong on this one. But then why are so many of the young, like I look at two types, right? You look at, I guess, what is considered the I guess the media, the YouTube media, like Breaking Points or Rising, which is kind of like a news show, but it's kind of online. Those are long, but they're a bunch of short clips, like 10 minutes, 5 minutes,
Right.
blah blah. But you look at the podcast types, many of them an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. That's so I don't know. I'm torn. Is it because someone's listening while they're working versus watching? I'm not sure what that is. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is a sort of different type of audience member. I think that live streams themselves have a different level of appeal. And I would also say that you can premiere videos on YouTube, which creates the same sort of effect where
Mm,
people are watching it simultaneously
right.
that first time. And that has a greater audience retention. My understanding, the last time that I saw a stat like this was that people watch for about 4 times as long a premiere of the same video as if they were to just press play on it later. To people who
Wow.
don't know what I'm talking about, like when I published my 20-minute video summarizing last night, I set that to premiere this morning at 9:30 a.m. And so
Got
if
it.
you were to watch it right now, it's just a YouTube video like we're all familiar with. But if you watched it at 9:30, it played as if it were like a live video
Yeah.
from, I guess, 9:30 to 9:50, where everybody watching it during that first premiere was seeing it at the same point. And so their comments, people
Mm,
commenting with each other, would be
yes.
watching the same moment in the video sort of simultaneously. And that kind of has that same feeling of real time or being
And
live.
kind of everyone's together, kind of enjoying the same thing at the same time together, almost like we're all watching TV in the same room. Like
Yeah,
almost like that.
there's a sense of community about that, and I think that, again, my particular style of videography, because it doesn't lead people to necessarily have a specific viewpoint of what they're watching. It's sort of neutral ground for people to share their thoughts about what it is they're watching. People can very much in good faith watch two sides that are debating each other in real life in the video, and then they are commenting, I agree with that side. No, you're wrong.
Mhm.
I agree with the other side. Right. And I
Absolutely.
think that that can create good live discussion.
Well, Sam says the cover-ups bother me almost as much as the shadow bans. I suppose both are two sides of the same problem. Let's normalize transparency in governments and corporations. I mean, how can you be a yes,
Yeah. Right.
right?
I
I mean,
certainly
yes.
support that. Yeah, on
Well,
all fronts.
what has always bothered me is what you said, right? I feel like no one's talking about this side of the Twitter or Facebook, which is if I am a member of Facebook, whether I am spending money to grow my page or whether I'm just watching and putting up content. In essence, there is an implied agreement between me and Twitter and me and Facebook, right? So say I'm paying for ads. There's an obvious contract, right?
Right.
Say I'm not paying for ads, but I'm just watching or posting stuff. I'm still providing value for them. There's an agreement. My problem is if you're going to ban me or shadow ban me or whatever, to your point, it's it's unethical business model to not tell. That'd be the same as if you're going to put an ad in a newspaper and I'm going to give you the stats on what the newspaper is, but your ad only goes in a certain part of the newspaper or only a certain part of town. And if I were only to put your ad in a certain part of town in my newspaper, going back to old school, right? The newspaper goes across the entire city, but your ad only goes in the Bronx. It doesn't go in Queens or Brooklyn or Manhattan, but I don't tell you that. I just only put your ad in the Bronx. Without question, there'd be a lawsuit. Without question, the newspaper is in the wrong. Without question, the newspaper has to tell you that. Now, can the newspaper say, I'll charge you less if you just go to the Bronx? Sure. Or can the newspaper say, if you do it because you are Ford, I don't like Ford, I'm only going to put you in the Bronx? Yes, but before I write that check, not after I write that check. So I feel like no one's talking about simply this is unethical business practices. Why isn't this a civil lawsuit against them? This is years ago, I was trying to build out my my company website, my Neosage company website from, this is 15 years ago, maybe in Facebook. I put thousands of dollars into my website and they shut my website down completely saying that I was spamming, even though what I do is consulting. I can't spam. Like you can't buy anything. You can't click and buy something, right? You've got to reach out to me in some way, shape, or form. I wasn't selling t-shirts or something, right? And no appeal process, shut me down, thousands of dollars in the garbage, and I had no recourse. And I thought to myself, if that were a newspaper or if that was a radio station, I'd had a lawsuit. I had nothing. So I'm sorry, I went kind of off, but I think it reminded me of what Sam said about transparency. If you're going to screw me, you got to tell me you're going to screw me before I write the check.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that there's a challenge in terms of talking about like lawsuits or something, which is that there isn't actually a state apparatus. There's not a law that prescribes you that as a right. And I'm cautious about like when I hear
basic contract law.
Okay. So there's a point of view that says that. I think unfortunately, perhaps the terms and conditions that they have you sign basically just sign your soul away, right? At these places. And so if that's the position that you take, then basically you just have to not sign their terms and conditions because they're not going to be open to negotiating your terms of you joining Facebook. They'll just say, "Oh, well, you're welcome to not use it."
And I think that's the problem. Right? If you tried to sue Facebook or Twitter, it would be $1 million more, millions of dollars, lots of time. But I honestly think you could win because I think it implied, in other words, if I had a term of service agreement and that you signed that said, if you don't pay me $100 tomorrow, I own all your stuff. I could have that and you could sign it. It's unenforceable. No judge would go, yep, sorry, Ford. He owns everything you've ever had. He owns it all. No judge says that. They go, that's insane. That's stupid. Nobody would assume that. That would happen. No judge would go, Ford, give Larry all your stuff because you didn't give him $100 because you signed a piece of paper saying that if you don't do it, there's no way that would happen. And my point is, right? It's a similar thing.
So far in the state apparatus that exists, I've kind of explored this, like to the extent that I've seen people writing arguments about this, like, and some people have attempted lawsuits like that, and it seems like most of those have ended up being fruitless. The exception is, and both the exception that in terms of what I think could practically win, and also in terms of what I think should win, is if the state is actually colluding with the corporation to provoke the censorship, then I believe that they have run afoul of constitutional law, right? So if the executive branch, right, is saying this story feels disfavorable to us, or even fake, right? If the government is claiming we think that this isn't true and you shouldn't shouldn't allow it because we're telling you it's not true or whatever.
Right.
I think that interferes with speech in a way that probably like jeopardizes your right to not have the state infringe on your free speech. For the most part, though, I guess I will say the free market solution, right? The way that I tend to advocate about this is to actually advocate about it. So I think that there's a usefulness in, okay, there ended up being a CEO in place who wants to release this stuff. Like, let's all make the most of it. But even before that, when Facebook suspended me, I made a pretty viral thread explaining what happened on Twitter, and that was what provoked Facebook to put it back. Unfortunately, most people don't have that kind of leverage.
Yes, absolutely.
But I've also tried to sort of share that influence to the extent that I know how to reach out to these companies and kind of.
So let me touch this
I
piece too,
advocate for
right?
other people.
I feel like there is, while there's obviously a lot of a bad side and downside to social media censorship, I do think there is a positive side. I think the fact that social media censors, I think, made people create more social media, made people think differently. It did spur, as a silver lining to the dark cloud, people saying, oh, maybe I should go on my own. Maybe I should do Substack, right? Or maybe I should, do my own website, or maybe I should, be on multiple channels or something. I think that was something that was interesting. I feel like that was a good side effect. Am I wrong?
I think that has been a positive side effect, but it doesn't solve the issue for me entirely. So like when I talk about the problems that I've faced on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, people say like, well, why aren't you just using Rumble and all these other things? So I have a Minds account, which is like roughly an independent Twitter-like thing. And I also have an Odyssey account, which is basically an independent sort of YouTube equivalent. And I do actively cross-post my content to both of those things, both sort of as a way of backing up my work, but also having it available to a different audience. The main issue that I've had with really all of these independent sites, though, is because of just how gigantic the other social media sites are. They kind of have become the public square, whereas these alternatives are exactly that. They're alternatives. And so the people who are actually consuming content on them are people who have found themselves to be pariahs for some reason or another from the other social media sites. And while I am happy to reach them, I don't want to exclusively reach those sorts of people. And particularly in my profession, where the people who watch my work are people who I intend to serve, but my customer, like my business customer, really is documentaries and news programs who might license my work by seeing it. And so those types of journalists are only looking on Twitter, and those sorts of documentarians, if you watch a movie, archive producer, right, is usually the person who pays me for my work in a documentary. Like that kind of person is very predominantly using YouTube to accomplish that. And so while having additional alternatives is a positive, it cannot be relied on professionally.
There we go. I know. I agree. No, I'm with you. I was just saying it was a side effect that was good.
It's a good thing that there's more competition, and it probably, even if to a minuscule degree, it probably encourages the other social media platforms to compete. Right. If they know that there's another option and there might be somebody sitting on the fence thinking, God, I just really hate Twitter, maybe I'll just only use my other one. Like maybe to keep that customer or that user, they improve their services to some degree. But I think that these corporations are so gigantic, they think they're immune from all consequence.
Yes. Except I think, you look at someone like, for example, the cable companies, right? The cable companies did whatever they wanted until satellite came out. Then they were like, oh, wait, so we can't just... Spectrum had to change their name. Like most people don't even remember. Spectrum wasn't always Spectrum, right? It was Verizon or something. I think it was Verizon. Yeah, they were so bad that the customer service was so bad they changed the name. That's how bad it was. And that's only because Dish and DirecTV came out. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. So I think that having something out there now, Netflix, right, was the be all and end all. Now they're in trouble. Why? Hulu. Who thought Hulu would give them? Disney Plus? Right. I mean, when Hulu first came out, Hulu was clearly second tier when it first came out to Netflix. It was clearly second tier. It's still, I think, in many ways is second tier, but it is giving them a run for the money. So is Paramount Plus and Disney Plus and blah, 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 right? All of them are giving them a run for the money now. I feel like having all the other, the Odyssey and the Rumble does make YouTube realize I can't be too bad. Like,
right. Yeah,
I can't be too bad. I can be bad, but there's a level, because if I go too far, all of a sudden I'm going to make Odyssey or whomever a real competitor. And I don't want to do that. So I think it does help a little bit, if that makes any sense.
To some extent. I think that part of the issue, using YouTube probably as a primary example, is that their base of people who they're making the revenue from are largely other big corporations. So YouTube began very democratized,
Sure.
very, very invested really in independent media, but maybe the way to say it would be independent content creators, right? It was supposed to be
Right.
YouTube, right? And now, you know, around 2019, as this trend was occurring where mainstream media just started posting everything on YouTube as well, Fox YouTube, CNN YouTube, right?
Yep.
That was when YouTube suddenly became very interested in siphoning attention from
Right.
independent media and into those places. When YouTube first described, they were describing that they were driving audiences by a margin of 70%, taking away from independent media and sending it toward what they called like reputable sources.
Wow.
That was like
that.
2019.
Wow.
They were flaunting that as a figure that we're siphoning algorithmically people toward what they called reputable sources. In 2019, they had a policy change during what they called what other people have called the Vox adpocalypse. There was a controversy between a couple of YouTubers. YouTube subsequently, under pressure, made slightly stricter guidelines. And when they did that, they demonetized about 1,000 channels. And mine was actually one of them. And it took 7 months of me advocating before they acknowledged that it was a mistake and reversed it. But what was interesting about that, in addition to just 7 months of income, that they're just like, oh, well, but in addition to that problem, my content output didn't really change, right? I had filmed that happened about mid-year. I had filmed about the same number of videos with about the same amount of you know, violence, action, whatever. Like the content wasn't fundamentally different in the first half of 2019 versus the second half. Pretty much exactly when they did that demonetization action, my viewership dropped. It was like within a couple points of 70%. It was like 72%.
Wow.
So clearly my channel was marked, however they have it internally, as this is an independent news channel, ergo
mine dropped by about 85%.
Send people. Yeah. So
85%.
So today, something that you can see, I've done this fairly recently. You could probably experiment on it right now. So my channel is called News to Share, news the number 2 share. When I've searched News to Share and then like Brookhaven, which is where I filmed a Black Panther event, or just News to Share Black Panther, I have actually found that it will sometimes as the top of the list, not just additional things, but like at the top of the list, it will show you a story from CBS about the exact same Black Panther chapter that I filmed. And so it knows what you are looking for. Like it identifies the video of mine that is clearly what you're asking for because you're referencing my channel, and it will show you essentially the mainstream media's version of the same story. And so my belief is that that's probably what's happening essentially roughly 70% of the time.
Got it.
The Twitter files kind of showed us a back end of something sort of similar a little bit. YouTube, I'd be really interested to see that. Now, granted, I don't think an Elon Musk-like figure would be able to buy Google and release all the documents. I don't want any human being to have enough power that they could acquire all of Google. Right? Like,
just buy it tomorrow.
Right.
How much is that? Write a check.
Right, just write a check. Yeah, like
I'll take 2 Googles if you don't mind. I don't want 2 Googles.
Too much power. But if somehow some benevolent dictator took over Google and then leaked the documents, I would really love to see and understand those processes. I think it's probably bad for our digital democracy that we're not able to understand the inner workings of how they drive what we see.
But I want to go to that point of institutions, right? I understand, not that I agree. I want to be clear. I'm not agreeing or advocating. I'm saying I understand many reasons why when YouTube does what it does, that the individual people within the organization would agree to it, right? If YouTube is saying, hey, I think we can make more and consistent cash by going to big organizations and having them give us stuff instead. We can make money from the PewDiePies here or there, but there aren't that many PewDiePies. If the PewDiePie is, right? Very popular YouTuber. There aren't that many PewDiePies out there. So let's just go to all the big boys and they'll give us money. It makes sense monetarily. But not everybody in the company is going to think monetarily it makes sense. They're like, I don't care about the money. I care about what's right or whatever. It's YouTube, right? But then the next piece is they're going to say, yeah, but if our institutions are giving information, the odds are it's right because we should care about our institutions and value institutions. In theory, I agree with that, meaning in a theoretical world, we should care about institutions. We should respect our institutions. We should value them. But the reality of it is we don't. And they've given us lots of reasons to not respect them or trust them, right? To the point Sam mentioned, they haven't been transparent. They've done all the things that are bad. Isn't that a bad thing that we don't respect institutions? And with that in mind, does that mean we'll simply create new ones? And will one of them be a Matt Taibbi or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Substack has broken through in some ways on doing that. That's probably the best one in terms of like it's almost replaced the idea of like a digital newspaper. Like it's a place that people have long form journalism that they can take very seriously. But I think that like the masses are so addicted to some certain websites, it's hard to get people off of them. Like
what do you mean by that?
Well, okay, so I've seen usually it's been kind of people as a trend more on either like the libertarian or the right end of the spectrum who are interested in alt social media platforms. And there's been sort of an interesting trend in the Elon Musk Twitter era where I've seen people who are more like liberals, liberal Democrats. And when I say liberal, I mean like Democrats, establishments, whatever, center left Americans who want to escape Twitter because they're not happy with the way that the company is run now. And some of them have been playing with the idea of what are our alternatives, right? And they are not going to Minds. They're certainly not going to Gab.
Right. Or Parler. They're not going to Parler.
Or something, right? They're not like, oh, we're going to escape Elon and go to Trump's Twitter.
Right.
They're not going to Trump Social. What's that called? Truth Social. They're not going to Truth Social.
Yeah, Truth Social, right. Yeah, we're not going to Truth Social. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. The former.
By the way, I am actually on Parler and Gab too. I'm on all of them.
Wow.
I am. Yes.
So but there's I don't even know how to pronounce it, but there's a Twitter alternative like Mastodon or something like that.
Mastodon. Yep. I'm on Mastodon also.
Yep. Oh, you have one of those. So I
have all of the things.
You do? Okay, so good for you
all
that you're
of the
able to
interweb things. I have them all.
I can't keep track of so many of them, which like I have no ideological reason to not do all of these things, but it's a hassle to post on like a dozen different things.
I have about 19, if I remember right.
Wow. So
I think 19.
I saw a thread about Mastodon that was really fascinating to me, where somebody was advocating that his fellow liberals basically go onto Mastodon and escape from Twitter. And the thread was about the learning curve of joining it. And he was saying how, you might find it kind of more complicated. It's not going to have all the same features in exactly the same place. And he was kind of trying to like console them, like, you're an adult, you're capable of learning, like you can do something new, and if you really care about the problems at Twitter and that would be enough to leave, then actually act on it. And so, I mean, it was making an interesting, compelling point, but the fact that he had to actually say that stuff shows that that's not that easy of an alternative to just jump to. And somebody, if they began to post to Mastodon and not these other places, is clearly forfeiting an audience, which if you're doing social media kind of recreationally, isn't that big of a deal. But for me, I literally could not conduct my business basically without
you would have to have a Joe Rogan figure, like it's Joe Rogan goes to Spotify. Right. It's Howard Stern goes to XM or what do you go, Sirius, wherever he went to. It's Howard Stern goes to wherever he went back in the day, and then Joe Rogan going. So you got to have someone like that, right? You got to have whoever the cool guy of the day is now has to go to Mastodon or something, right? That has to happen.
Yeah, and some of these platforms have been doing promotional things like that. I mean, like I joined Minds and Odyssey, and both of them sort of incentivized me to advertise to my audience that I had joined those places, but a very a minuscule amount compared to a Joe Rogan Spotify.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I hope we get that deal. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, right. That's what
Yes.
I'm working my way up
Yes.
to that. When they say,
by the way, if I get that deal, I will trash the other 18.
Yeah, you're right.
I'll do only one with that deal. Whatever the one is, you want to give me that
Larry Sharp
deal?
on Spotify, number 2.
That's correct. I'm on whatever. I'll be on Mastodon for that money. I'm on Mastodon only. That's it. No worries. Totally sell out. Absolutely. So Jonathan says, Larry, another great guest, started following news to share quite a while ago and appreciate the boots on the ground view. Shows indicators that aren't always obvious. Oh, shows indicators that aren't always obvious. There we go. Yes. You have a fan.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Here we go. Yes. Logic says, Elon is certainly shaking things up. I'm always skeptical and never a fan of anybody or worship any celebrity type, but so far, I love what I'm seeing from Mr. Musk.
I think that's a pretty reasonable comment. I have had some issues with the way that Elon has been running it so far. I'm optimistic about certain elements of the progress, his apparent commitment to transparency on some fronts. But I will just say, if somebody wants to, some cold water on Elon, there have been censorship of some people who would not have been censored before in the Elon era. And while he's been emphasizing that he's taking down like child exploitation content. Everybody agrees that should be taken away. But he has been censoring, for example, today, there's a bot account that existed before that used publicly available flight info to actually show where Elon Musk's private jet is. Right. And it's based on public info. It's not a hack. It's not, whatever. I shouldn't say he suspended that. The platform suspended that today. So, I mean, not the biggest deal in the world per se, but like, but I don't want anybody to be censored. I think that there has been an issue where, the right has felt like they have taken a disproportionate amount of censorship, and that may be true, but it does affect everybody. And I've seen now the right kind of reveling in, under Elon, there are certain leftists who might have considered themselves immune before who are now being censored. And I think that that's probably not a smart mindset. Like I think like if you're excited about Elon because you want the censorship to go away, then you don't want to cheer him on censoring your enemies. That will bite you in the butt as soon as Elon's not the CEO someday.
I definitely think that the overall plus minus, totally a plus with Elon, right? There's minuses. No, you're right. He's not perfect and nobody is, but plus minus, total, much more plus than minus. Much more plus than minus. Gray says, great topic, an interesting guest. Love shows like this. We're winning. Look at us, Ford. We're winning. I like that. So I do want to go to another piece, which I think isn't there a symbiosis between mainstream media, independent journalism, and the podcast, where the reaction videos, right? That, I mean, isn't there a symbiosis? If one goes away, don't the others suffer?
Yeah. Okay. So we can kind of do it in reverse. So the talk shows, the opinion shows, right.
The chatterbox class.
The things that they are opining on are basically the news that they are working on some kind of an assumption that you might have at least some kind of a foundational knowledge of in the first place. Right. So be that, and to be clear, I don't like this kind of program anyway, but like Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow or somebody like this is mostly spending their time talking about what they think of the things that happened.
They call it news analysis,
right? News analysis, or essentially commentary, right? And you watching this program, the viewer may have a favorable opinion of one of those people that I mentioned, or somebody else might come to mind as somebody who you really like their particular opinions. I will say I liked John Stossel a lot back in the day, but he was somebody who tended to have analytical opinions on things as opposed to just a straight news presentation of stories. Those have to come from a straight news presentation or a somewhat straight news presentation of whatever the news was in the first place, which is mostly consumed through mass media like cable news and,
Sure.
Fox and CNN on YouTube and so forth.
Yep.
The trend used to be that mainstream cable news really followed from like local and newspaper reporting, right? On the ground journalism has always existed, and it didn't used to necessarily be this independent outside of the corporate world stuff, but newspaper reporters would come up with stories,
Yeah.
and then if they were important enough, like the gatekeeper of cable news would ultimately sort of let that journalist on or talk about those stories, and that would be kind of how
That
it would
was
get onto
literally
air.
CNN's strength in the 90s. Like that was CNN's power in the 90s. In the 90s, CNN had more of a network of people like that than anybody else, hands down. Right? If
Right.
there was like a volcano that went off or there was a hurricane somewhere, CNN had somebody over there who could, shove a mic in their face and they could tell you what's happening and watch the hurricane go over their head or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
That was their thing. But you're right. There isn't the same. It isn't the same now.
Yeah, when I travel the country a lot doing what I do, and when I'm like in an Airbnb or a hotel or something, I do like watching the local news. I find it a lot more informative, a lot more up close, and honestly a lot more objective than national cable news networks,
Right.
which feel a greater level of disconnect from the source material. I think independent journalism today is filling in kind of a gap that exists because of how defunded local, not necessarily independent, but essentially just local journalism has been.
Right.
Newsrooms that you might have had several staffers who worked in one newsroom for a single town's newspaper. And now, like you were saying, like my local town paper from the town I grew up in, they went from several reporters for my hometown to one reporter who covers a few different towns, and
Yes,
they
that's the norm
basically
now.
have different variations of the same stories showing up in several newspapers. And so
And they syndicate stuff.
right, so the
Yeah.
journalism has kind of lost its quality, not because the journalists have lost their quality, but because
Correct.
there's sort of fewer of them. And I think that fills in a
Yeah.
niche where, for me as an independent journalist, instead of my niche being a geographic space, like I cover this area of this town or this handful of towns, my niche that I have picked is I do raw video of political activism. It's a very
Right.
specific type of thing. And similarly, you will find independent journalists who cover specifically technology or
Right.
specifically
Yep.
economics or business or whatever. And so those people become experts in their particular field as opposed to experts in a region of geography. And so when the mainstream media has not managed to send somebody, or when there's not a cable affiliate of the mainstream media who managed to send somebody to something, then they do have to rely on somebody like me to cover it.
There we go. Sam brings up a point. He says, "Isn't the airplane tracker similar to doxing or stalking, which are already illegal?" There's a part of me that agrees with that, right? Elon Musk is somebody who, literally might have a threat on his life if he doesn't have many of them, has at least threats against his life. Isn't it realistic to say you should pull that down because there's an actual threat of violence, or no?
I think a couple thoughts on that. Firstly, there are other airplane trackers that do this same thing about other people that were not taken down. So if that's true, it has to
Oh,
be
I
true for
see.
everybody.
Makes
So
sense.
the preferential treatment given to Elon has to um, be kind of a factor being understood there.
Good
Secondly,
point.
though, plane the movement of planes already is just something that people can track online. So it might be obviously easier for you to do if there's just a Twitter account just listing the info for you. But if you know how, it's already publicly accessible, basically where all the airplanes are at any time. Like you or I could log on and do that. I don't even know the name of the
Yeah.
website off the top of my head, but that's a
But
tool that exists.
and this is a serious question here, is there the fact that there would be a Twitter account that would do that?
Mhm.
Is this encouraging someone to go, oh, if this exists, that must mean somebody wants me to? Does that count, if that makes any sense, right? Am I encouraging it by doing that? And to your point, though, wouldn't I get rid of all of them? And I would say
Yeah,
you're right. Either none of them or all of them. I agree with that, right? Either get
yeah,
rid of
I
them
think
all or none. But
I
is there
admit
a
that that's a
yes?
challenging question. That's an interesting and challenging question. I have I don't care really where Elon's jet is.
Mhm.
But I will say that in my own profession, there is a relevance in the arrival and departure of politicians. So
Mm.
living near Washington D.C., it's not exactly the kind of work that I do often, but I'm in photography, signal chats and so forth, where we talk about,
Sure.
what types of shots can be gotten. Joe Biden is going to church today, right? Like they will say like Joe Biden's going to be exiting and entering at this door, and so if you go to this place, you'll be able to
Got
photograph
it.
the president entering, whatever. They use tools like that to know, this person is arriving. And sometimes there are interesting kind of mysteries. Like Trump flew into DC once, I think it was this year, and they were like, why is Trump here? What's happening? Right? Or Trump's jet, right? Is Trump coming? For
Right.
something. And I think it was that he attended like a pro-life ball or something that hadn't been previously announced that he'd be there. So there's a valid journalistic purpose for that in at least the case of politicians, figures in government. When Nancy Pelosi flew to Taiwan, that was like a really fascinating one that people were like watching
Oh,
minute to
right.
minute,
Yes.
right?
I
Because there
remember.
was the small off chance that like China would shoot her down, which would never. I mean, it would be an act of war. It
Right.
was not considered to be
But it was still
probable.
exciting though.
But but people were tense about that because it was an
Right.
intense political decision that she had made that was considered adversarial to China as a kind of hostile power. And so it was
Right.
interesting to watch where her jet was at any given moment.
Yes.
So there is a valid purpose for that in general. I would say it has to be applied equally.
Michael says Ted Turner selling CNN to Time Warner AOL was when it went downhill. I don't remember when that was, but that seems to be the right amount, the time frame, right? I feel like it started to go there. It feels right. But I
Yeah.
gotta my
There-
feeling though, I gotta tell you. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so I don't know the exact year that happened, but there's a stat that independent journalists use a lot, which is that like 90% of the media you consumed is owned by six corporations. Um,
Oh, yes, you're right.
so
Yes, yes,
just the
yes.
the generally the lack of incentive for uh for real competition that comes out of these corporations all kind of gobbling each other up and being kind of one behemoth, media entity. Definitely, I think we can all see as a negative.
I feel like it really began when CNN stopped doing news and started doing opinion.
Mm,
That's when I think it went downhill, right? When they were trying to follow the Fox model. If you remember, those of you who are old enough remember that when Fox first came on, they had almost no opinion until around 8 o'clock. So, like prior to 8, they were really just basically a straight news channel. Then at 8, they went to like, here's the opinion stuff and why we think the Democrats are evil, right? That started at around
right,
8. CNN had hardly any of those. Maybe one or two was like Crossfire or something. It
right.
wasn't a thing CNN had.
With Tucker
But
Carlson.
then that's right. Yes, Tucker was on Crossfire. It's correct. Yes, he was. So that's kind of what they had, which is like a both sides type thing. If you remember,
Right.
Hannity's show used to be Hannity and Combs. It
Right.
wasn't
Yeah.
Sean
But
Hannity.
he was just sort of like the liberal punching bag, right?
That's correct.
Like
But it
because he
was
was seen as
it
the
was
weaker
in theory.
character.
But
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 it
again, at that
was
point, yes, it was still theoretically fair because you
right.
had at least the lefty there, kind of ish, right? You kind of had him there, right? So it was kind of a thing, right? But then as Fox began to open that up and be more opinion, CNN copied them.
Mm,
And I think that was a huge mistake for CNN. Let MSNBC do that, right? CNN should have stayed straight news, and they didn't. They tried to go that way. And what my issue is, and this is personal, I watch Fox and MSNBC. I rarely watch CNN. And the reasons why is MSNBC and Fox they're transparent to me, right?
mm,
MSNBC is like Republicans are evil, period. If you don't like it, why are you watching? That's how MSNBC is, right? And Fox like Democrats are evil. If you don't believe it, why are you watching? That's how they are. CNN pretends to be fair. They pretend to not have an opinion. They act
mhm,
as though they're above the fray, but they're not. They're right in it. And that
mm,
part bothers me. If you're gonna be partisan, I don't care. Just be I'm partisan, I'm libertarian. I'm blatantly partisan, right? Of
mhm.
course I am, but I wear it on my sleeve, right? So you know exactly who I am and how I
Right.
think, and I'm biased in the way I'm biased. And I feel like CNN fails at that miserably. Did I go too long on that? I've got a
No,
CNN
no
issue.
problem. My
I got a
issue with
problem.
CNN is a lot of the same things that you just said, but also the fact that their panel model, what they do often is they kind of like stick on, and we have Republican consultant, blah blah blah, and Democratic
Right.
strategist, blah blah blah, and they kind of assert to you that, like, because we have one view and then a countervailing view, that these two people arguing with each other, like, the net sum of their debate is truth. And what that really just confines you to is this cheap binary of opinion, that there's
Yes.
only two allowable opinions, and those two opinions are the Republican and Democratic parties. And if you are somebody who is libertarian or socialist or anarchist or like, there's any number of different things that you can be outside of the narrow, like, Overton window that is the
Right.
United States two-party system. And I think that they basically make a statement by telling you these are the two voices that you get to listen to.
To speak to that, if you would, guys, if you like this show and you want to support it, do me a favor. Go to my sponsors, theadvocates.org. Heading over there and take they have a bunch of surveys. You can take the identity politics and political correctness survey if you like. Please that if you like. There's others you can take too, or just take the world's smallest political quiz and see where you actually fall. Do you fall more towards conservative, more towards progressive, more towards authoritarian, more towards libertarian? People always say, Larry, this is skewed, so everyone's libertarian. No, it actually, the reality of a test is, those you don't know, most people, not most, I'm sorry, there's no majority. The plurality are moderate. That's the truth. But here's a little interesting tidbit for those of you who may care. While the people who take the survey is not a representative sample of America, it's just people who take it, right? It's voluntary. So we don't have a representation of America. But we do have a pattern. The same types of people keep taking it. And over the last couple of years, you know what there's been an increase in? Authoritarian. Authoritarian is the smallest of all the groups. The largest is moderate, the second largest is libertarian, but the lowest is actually authoritarian, but that's been getting bigger. That should make us all worried. That should make us all worried. So these surveys do matter, guys. Help out my sponsor. They're free. They're free. The world's smallest political quiz is like 2 minutes long, maybe even less. These are about 6 or 7 minutes each. But take one of them, take two of them. They're interesting. Share them out there. Makes my sponsors happy. You're helping me out, and it costs you nothing. So please do that if you can. It's really good for me. I really appreciate it if you can. I want to give you one more comment if I could, though. Right? This is something from Grace. Grace brings up, I've noticed that people on the left and right both watch News to Share. Look at that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of the point, is basically
fans.
that it doesn't alienate anybody. I mean, it gives everybody the opportunity to be informed by what's happening, and they might be angered or pleased with the thing that they are seeing, but the platform itself is not meant to be judging them for their own opinion or excluding kind of anybody. So I appreciate that observation from P. Grace.
There we go. Yes. So I think we've covered a bit today. Is there something that maybe we should have covered that I might have missed?
I think this was a pretty substantial conversation. I'd be happy to talk about the activism itself. I mean, the direction of the country. I think there's a lot of kind of.
Oh my God! Yes. Okay, guys, stay. It's gonna be good.
That's probably a whole nother show.
No. I have a generic question for you.
Okay.
The generic, and you go as far as you want. Guys, don't leave. Stay. We got a good one coming up here. Don't leave.
Okay.
The question I really want to come, and I really mean this. Do you think this protesting activism actually works? And that's a real question that I have, because in my view, from what I've seen, most of this doesn't actually work. It's virtue signaling on both sides. It reinforces what your view is. This is my view. To be clear, I have no data on this whatsoever. This is just my personal opinion, whatever you think. That I feel like it just reinforces that if you like the left, you believe the lefties are doing a great job and the righties are all evil. If you like the right, you think the righties are doing a good job, the lefties are all evil. I feel like it doesn't move the needle. I feel like every time we have substantive protest, that the media will always shove it into a left-right culture war. We'll have culture war change and no real change. That's my view. Am I wrong? Am I right? You know something else? Tell me.
So I think that it is complicated, and it depends on the type of action that is being done. There's a phrase that's often used on the left where they say direct action gets the goods, meaning that doing something, direct and sometimes physically confrontational, sort of gets what they want, that they can force some kind of policy change, essentially, literally by force. I will give an example that I don't think that people will think on the whole is necessarily positive. But so, like, yesterday I filmed the protest against the drag Christmas event that ended up happening anyway. But in
Yep.
Columbus, Ohio, a week and a half ago, there was going to be a similar thing at a church. There was going to be a drag event at a church, and Proud Boys said that they were going to protest it, and subsequently, the event was canceled. And Proud Boys still showed up, and then a number of other right wing groups showed up, but they essentially got what they wanted. The event didn't happen out of fear of violence happening outside of it. And so that's not necessarily a positive thing. Some people might say, from the Proud Boys' perspective, they would say that that was a success. Demonstrations against.
But hold on. Say that. Okay, they get that, right? They get the one drag show to not happen, right? Yay, Proud
Yep.
Boys. Well done. But have they actually gotten what they wanted? Let me give you the they.
Mhm.
Did the Proud Boys get what they want? Yes, they themselves as an organization have shown a victory. They can get more people to join them. They can get more money. So victory for Proud Boys. Good for them, I guess. But the people, the individual people who actually don't like the drag show thing, right? Those people who would support the Proud Boys, do they get what they want? Have the drag shows stopped? No. So what's happened is now more people on the thread are angrier at each other. The drag shows haven't stopped. The Proud Boys make money. It's awesome. And reverse, right? When Antifa does something and then the right doesn't get what they want, right? And the right doesn't get to do their thing. Well, then Antifa wins for the time. People who support Antifa get to give them more money, whatever. But is the right-wing Nazi, with whoever they're mad at, the Nazi's going to speak whatever. Okay, he doesn't speak there, but he's still speaking. He just didn't speak there. And I think that is my point, right? Can I get an individual victory? Can I get a drag queen to stop to not show up? Can I get, Jordan Peterson to not show up, or whoever is the bad guy in my world?
Right.
Yes. But do I actually silence the drag queen people, or do I silence Jordan Peterson? Do I really make the change, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they would say that they contribute to point to making whatever their point is and then gaining attention to it, and that might drive a change in wider policy or culture shift or whatever. People become aware of issues because they're protested on the street. I think the place that I see this probably the most often is like police shootings, where it seems like there's not going to be some kind of legal accountability for a police officer. People feel that by holding protests, they're forcing there to be attention to it. Recently I filmed in Mississippi, where there was a shooting of a 15-year-old young man in the head outside a Dollar Tree by police. And I don't think most people were aware of that shooting. His name was Jaheim McMillan. I might be pronouncing it wrong, but Black Panthers showed up. I was one of the only journalists who was there, and I would guess that basically out of my audience, like for almost all of them, it was their first exposure to that particular shooting, that there's an awareness of a person who died. And that may lead to the police officer being slightly more likely to be charged with a crime. But even if it didn't, there are more people who are aware of that problem because of the activism. I mean, you could see as a subject, police violence has been a subject that is discussed a significant amount more in the last 30 years, but accelerating upwards as social media and so forth have become available, which then drive activism. And there's sort of a cycle that has forced us to be more aware of that and accountable to that. So like, it can sometimes be hard to draw a super direct line, like this protest caused this thing. And I will also say that sometimes there's a lot of backfire, right? Like January 6th, as an example, probably became, a liability to the MAGA movement. And in terms of like the operational objective of it, right, prevent the certification of Joe Biden as president, they delayed it by a few hours, and Joe Biden was inaugurated on January 20th as planned. So they failed, right? But in addition to that, 700 of them arrested, probably a stain from most people's perspective on the former president's kind of historical reputation, maybe his ability to run again successfully. Like that certainly had an impact, but it was the opposite impact.
Sure. Okay.
There's also the belief among some activists, I'll just quickly say, which is that by going out, they're defending against something else. So in the case of like what I covered last night, right-wingers would have showed up with guns either way. from the
Right.
left-wing perspective, them showing up with guns wasn't just to advocate a position that homophobia is wrong, but to actually, from their perspective, protect
Mm.
the people inside the event from, armed people. That if they show up, we have to show up to retaliate in kind.
So the value is even in a counter protest.
Yeah.
So, okay. Logic says, what would be the right way to handle drag shows? Personally, I don't think kids should be attending functions like that. Drag shows that have never been an event for minors until recently. Well, I'll give you my opinion, Logic. I don't care, right? If you like drag shows, please go. If you don't, please go. I agree with you. I don't think children should go to drag shows. Therefore, I don't take my children to drag shows. But if you're the kind of parent who thinks it's a fine thing, I can't stop you. If you don't take it to a drag show, you'll take them someplace else. You'll do what you think's right for your kid. I don't know if I could stop you. Could I tell you and maybe use the bully pulpit and say, hey, I don't think you should be taking your kid to a drag show? I guess I could. But is it a battle worth fighting? If your parent thinks it's okay, what are you going to do? And that's my libertarianism again on my sleeve, coming right out. I can't stop a parent from if I'm going to decide whether government decides or parent decides, I'm always going to err on the side of the parent, even if the parent's wrong. Because if the parent's wrong, it's still the kid's parent. I don't know. Am I wrong? Tell me.
I don't think I have anything to add on that. I will say that especially because I'm covering conflict over this subject, I don't want to opine on it. So
there we go.
I will
Give
sort
it
of
easier.
leave that
Yes.
at that. I don't want people
Yes.
to watch my footage through the color of my own opinion of that subject.
Yes. Make total sense. Well, I don't mind. I will totally be opinionated on it. I'll do it. I'm not doing
sure.
what he does. I'll do it. So yes, no, I think that people should do what they feel is right. And I don't actually have a problem with either protesting either. I don't have a problem with the right going, this is evil and bad. I don't have a problem with the left coming out, do something, then we'll shoot you. I don't have a problem with that. You have a right to go to a drag show if you want to. Go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. If you ask my opinion, I will tell you my opinion. I wouldn't take my kid to a drag show. I think it's a bad idea. But so you're not my kid, right? If you're my kid, then you do what I say, but you're not my kid. So that's it. That's my view. Let me grab one more if I could.
Sure.
The Scientific Libertarian says, retaliation happens with a lot of issues. Laying to Republicans too much, you get Trump. Laying to Democrats too much, you get socialists in Congress. Talk about vaccine mandates, you get loud anti-vaxxers. I think he's if you protest too much, you get a backlash. Maybe I could see that. I could see his point.
That's true to some extent. I mean, to give a really simple example, like the movement commonly known as Antifa, right? They call themselves anti-fascists, and their viewpoint is that their existence is necessitated by what they view as fascist activism. And so they very clearly define themselves by what they oppose, and generally essentially make the claim that were it not for their rivals, they would simply not have to be out there in that capacity. So, I mean, I do think that it's true that there's reaction and counter reaction for sure.
Yes. See, now Otaku says, I recall someone saying the liberals drag us southwest, the conservatives drag us southeast, so we end up going south really fast. I think there's some truth to that too, isn't it?
That's interesting. That's an interesting way of phrasing their perspective. I don't know that I have much to add to that, but that was interesting.
I do wonder though, right? Are we messing up by thinking that if we protest, we're taking action? When taking action would be, in theory, at least, according to what our democratic republic should be, which is we should be changing the laws and rules, right? That's what we should be doing, right? So that people can be as free as they want to be, or whatever the case may be. I feel like protesting almost just accepts that there's just going to be, that we're not going to change the system, if that makes any sense. We're going to get one thing changed, but not change the system that keeps making these problems, right?
I think that probably is only true if you don't look at the wider effects that could happen, such as networking at those events. So people in activist spaces are meeting other people who are like-minded and care enough about the thing to go out to the thing. So a really common thing that I hear at demonstrations, particularly in Washington, D.C., is that they'll have a protest about, we want more gun rights, or we want more gun control or something, right? And they'll talk about it. I think it's horrible that so many people got shot, or I think it's horrible that they're taking my guns away, like whatever the thing is. And there's often a call to action beyond that. Like, are you all fired up? And now are you going to actually do something about it when you leave? Yeah. Well,
Oh,
then sign
got
up
it.
for my
Okay.
thing. All right. Like that kind of stuff leads people to network, to actually work on something, to actually donate to somewhere, and so forth. So, I've covered a lot of actions for Julian Assange, for example, right?
Oh,
Those
sure.
might do some degree of pressure that maybe they make it slightly more likely that the DOJ drops charges. But frankly, probably not. Right? Like, is Merrick Garland really going to be like, wow, that's just too much protesting. I'm
Yes.
throwing in the towel on this one. Julian
Yep.
Assange can go first.
Merrick Garland's
Right.
probably watching News to Share, and he's like, "Damn, did you see that protest? All right, they win.
Yeah,
That's
they
it.
have Spike Cohen's there. It's over,
Exactly.
guys.
Damn you, Ford."
Right, they
That's
got,
it.
Ben Cohen
Yes.
from Ben and Jerry's was at one of those. Like the the ice cream man wants Assange free. Call
That's
it
it.
in.
We're freedom.
Um,
Let him go.
so like that, it might not have the direct obvious effect is we're advocating charges be dropped. Probably not actually going to happen, but it is bringing together a lot of people who believe in the same thing. That
Got
networking
it.
could cause them to ultimately donate. It could cause more people who support Assange to be in the courtroom, if assuming he's actually extradited,
Yep.
which can change proceedings to some extent because the
Sure.
jury sees that a number of people support them, a judge sees the number of people that support them. It could
Right.
ultimately cause a network of people who would write letters in support.
Right.
Like these sorts of things come out of the network that comes from a protest.
Makes sense. No, I like the idea. And by the way, guys, if you want to watch what Ford's doing, great. Head over to news2share.com. Also check out their YouTube page, also News to Share, or follow Ford on Twitter at Ford Fischer. If you're listening, Fischer is Fischer. That's the cool way of spelling Fischer.
The German way.
Yes. Correct. Yes.
Exactly.
The cool way. Yes, absolutely. So yes. So anyway, I want to make sure we brought that up. Look, so I guess the other hard part is how are you able as an individual to do, maybe you don't, right? How are you able to, you can't protest, I guess, right? Because of what you do, right? No one can, we can't see you at a protest because then, oh, he's one of them.
Right.
So,
yeah. And so that's why I generally decline to do that. And the space in which I advocate is I like I said, I do advocate on press freedom, free speech issues because I believe that they directly implicate my job. And for the most part, that comes from writing, right? I've occasionally written op-eds, but I've often tweeted criticisms of censorship policies by social media platforms and so forth.
Makes sense. Jamie says, we would not have all these protests if social media was not around. Social media helps people to stir the pot and brings out the extremists. I think there's some truth to that, but I'm not sure that's a bad thing, though.
Yeah, I mean, it helps people connect with like-minded people. I do think that there are problems with algorithmically putting people into echo chambers, right? When people end up only talking to other people who are like-minded. I mean, incidentally, this is part of my issue with alternative social media platforms is if people are driven to, oh, I was banned from Facebook, so now I'm joining Truth Social, you're only exposed to other, Trump supporters in their case, or Gab. I hesitate to define them, but I think that from my understanding, Gab is pretty one-sided, and it's not a
I'm on
the
Gab
conversation
too.
might be a little ugly.
Gab, Getter, MeWe, I'm on all of them.
Right. Oh, MeWe, I forgot about that one.
I'm on MeWe too.
How's MeWe going?
It goes. It's not bad. Look, I need to get this will be linked on MeWe. Yes. So yes, everything.
Yeah,
I need to get. The problem I have is people often see the show and go, well, Larry, there's only like 30 people or 100 people. Yeah, because I'm so shadow banned. That's why it goes on 18 things.
Right.
So that I can get the views that I want.
Yeah. So
across everything.
Tangentially, I guess that was part of the issue is the echo chamber. I even heard there was a social media platform called My Militia. It's just militia people.
Wow.
Which that was just okay, just send all your information directly to the feds. You may as well just log on to FBI.gov/MyMilitia.
That's who made that. It was the FBI made that. There's no doubt they made that, right? Yes. I want to go to jail.com. Done. Right. There it is. That's what 100% that was. Yes. Oh my God. I can imagine that being true. But your point is, very valid. My worry is if you look at the people who've done the mass shootings, the people who've done the most damage, they didn't get converted by being on Twitter, right? They didn't get converted by being on Facebook. They got converted by being on 4chan or whatever is the channel of the day, right? They went someplace else and they got converted to a point to where they would commit violence.
Or Gab. I mean, and the Pittsburgh shooter was on Gab,
There we go.
and
They went
he
to some
posted
other
on Gab
place.
immediately before. Like his last post on Gab was basically was foreshadowing that shooting.
Absolutely. Yes. So, I mean, those are the places they go. They don't really do that on Twitter. On Facebook and Twitter, what I see, sadly, is when people want to hurt themselves, right? That's what I see on Facebook. People, I know people who will say goodbye before they're going to try to commit suicide on Facebook, right? Which is still horrible.
Well.
That's horrible.
Very, very
but
upsetting.
The point is, if you put that on Facebook, I got a chance at calling you, right? So I'm happy they put it on Facebook so I can pick the phone and go, whoa, before you start doing that, can we have a conversation? So I think that's a good thing when people do that stuff on Facebook. But I think you're right. The further away they go from the mainstream, the more they are turned into something that we don't want them turned into. That's what I would say. So I do want to, let's see, grab one more. Scientific Libertarian says, riots happen when peaceful change becomes unavailable. I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, there's an MLK quote which is a little similar, which is riots are the language of the unheard. So
yes, I think that's closer, right?
That might
the
be
idea
closer
of it being, yeah. Because peaceful change is available. It's just hard as hell. I know. I tried to run for office this year. It's just hard as hell. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they can come from a sense of desperation.
Yes, absolutely.
So like when the person perceives that this is going to be the way that I will be heard, this is the way that I can make change. You know, like so January 6th, for example, right? Like someone could say that like, so violent change wasn't available either because it didn't work.
Right.
They also could not have peacefully protested their way into the certification not happening, probably. The peaceful change that would have been available would be more people voting for Trump in the first place, right? Like that would have solved it, right? That would have done the trick. More votes.
That's true. That would have done the job. You're totally right. Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, I've been to a lot of riots, and I think that they come from a sense of desperation, anger. Obviously, it depends what the riot is about. But I would suggest that it is rare that peaceful change is truly impossible. I think that it can be achieved, but it's often easier to try violence.
There we go.
And it's rarely true that the violence achieves the ends more effectively than anything else.
Absolutely. Michael says social media has actually helped dampen protest, in my opinion. In the past, if you wanted to protest, you organized and marched. Now we have armchair slacktivists who believe their civic duty begins and ends at the keyboard. Interesting concept. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that social media probably plays an outsized impact in our world today. And so keyboard warriors probably do more than nothing, but perhaps less than something.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that someone showing up in physical space to express an opinion is probably making much more of a statement than like, I'm so mad today at AOC. I did Donald Trump. How could you do this? Whatever. Like those things probably don't do very much, but occasionally, I mean, you can catch the attention of a politician. You might make some kind of point that makes some kind of change, but you probably are more persuasive by showing up in physical space.
Yeah, showing up matters so much. I mean, it really does matter tremendously. It does. Absolutely. Again, guys, if you want to follow what Ford's doing, news2share.com. You can also go to his YouTube page, also News2. And by the way, if you're listening, it is the number 2, not T-O or T-W-O. It's the number 2. So news2share.com. If you want to follow him on Twitter, it's Ford Fischer, and Fischer is Fischer. Follow him on Twitter if you like. That'd be great. And if you want to support me, you can. That would be awesome if you would, by liking this. It does matter. And more importantly, if you're watching this on Twitter, do me a favor. Share this on Twitter, right? Retweet this on Twitter. If you are on Twitter right now, watching on Twitter, retweet this on Twitter. It does matter. Every little bit counts, gets me past the algorithms, right? So I can get past it. Do that. It will help. So, Ford, I want to say thank you for coming around tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, guys, thank you so much for watching, all of you. I hope that we had a great, interesting show. And I will be on again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Some of you just can't get enough of me, I know. I'll be on again tomorrow and, of course, also on Friday. And I'll be at a Young Turks event Saturday at 5:15. For those of you, I will be posting that also. And doing a special Shortwave Christmas special, 3 hours long on relationships next Monday. So I am all over the place. I'm not leaving you yet. I will see you all, though,